Hello everybody, this is HD Shaves here. I'm back into the video. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope this finds you well and in good spirits. Let's get right into business today, and then we'll chat as we go on. I wasn't quite sure what to use for this week's video, but I asked some friends and they said, why don't you use something from the Barrister and Mann Reserve line? So I am happy to do that, and today we'll be using Barrister Reserve Cool, and then we'll also be using the matching splash. This is of course the old splash, and as of somewhat recently this is also the old soap. Will phased out of making the Reserve soap base, and now even these Reserve scents are made in the new omnibus base. And so if you're interested to know what the old Reserve soap base was like, you're welcome to pause the video here and look at those ingredients. To be honest, it's not a base that I have gotten along with very well over the years. You can see some videos where I've used Reserve base in the past on this channel, and so I wasn't really sad to see it go. But anyway, if you use a synthetic brush, I have gotten pretty good results with it, but I'll talk more about that as we go. And then for the razor today, we'll be using the Fatip Piccolo handle open comb razor. I used this in a video, comparison video, and some people weren't in agreement with me that I think this is the older style top cap with the newer style base plate, and it's caused a little bit of controversy, let's say, in the comment section, which I thought was quite funny. And so anyway, this is some variation of this razor. You have to be careful when you're loading the blade. It's a little bit difficult to get it lined up sometimes, but it took me about 3 tries today, and then eventually I got it. So I'm not going to disassemble and do that again for that very reason. So the scent on Reserve Cool, of course, it's a Italian barbershop scent in the same genre as something like Floyd Blue. And it's really, makes you feel like you're in a barbershop in Italy. There's an important distinction between the barbershop scents that are made here versus meant to be, inspired by over there. And ours tend to be more, sort of gourmandy, sort of like a fougere, whereas these Italian barbershop scents are more kind of citrus, musk based. And so that's kind of what I get from this. It's like the lemon, and there's this prominent sort of musk accord that I can't quite figure out what it is, but it really balances out the citrus nicely. I'm not a big fan of kind of basic citrus scents on their own. They have to be sort of paired with something for me to really enjoy it. And this one is a nice example of that. So let's go ahead and start loading the soap. We've got our Timberwolf knot wet through. And there's a old video where Will is sitting with the West Coast shaving guys at a at like a conference table, presumably in New York, and he does this little lathering tutorial for how to use this Reserve base. And not surprisingly, the first thing he recommends is to use a synthetic brush, which if you're having trouble with any soap base, I recommend you try it with a synthetic before you give up on it. And then he sort of talks about how much water the soap needs to have added to it, which is quite a bit. And so I try to always do those two things when I'm using the Reserve base. I try to use a synthetic, and I try to make sure I add enough water. So I'm sure this is enough soap. He has a specific amount of soap that he tells you to add, but I usually ignore those kinds of counting swirls type things. And so let's go ahead and get into our face lather here. Here we go. So I apologize for the lack of video last week. I, for some reason, thought it would be a good idea to use 2 defective shaving products and try to make a video out of it. I had a brush and a soap that didn't really work how they were supposed to. And I'm not sure why I thought they would magically work for me in a video, but I got about 6 minutes into that video last week, and then I thought, this is silly, these products aren't going to work. And then I promptly turned off the camera and then ended up using a different soap and brush for the rest of the shave also. So I apologize that nothing was released last week. I had every intention to do that and got as far as clicking record, but it didn't get more than that. So I guess the difficult thing about this base is that you're at this point and it looks like okay, but I just know from experience that it needs a ton more water. So don't be shy if you're using this base to add a lot of water. It just still looks a little bit too pasty and kind of like holding onto the skin instead of being a little bit more fluffy. So I'm just going to keep adding water, and I'm going to speed this part up, and then when I come back I'll talk about some of the characteristics that I find once I get to my end result. So be right back. Okay, we're back, and I'm surprisingly happy with the lather today. Usually I go for that translucent look with the lather, but with this soap, the look can be a little bit deceiving. And as I mentioned in recent videos, it's more about how the brush begins to feel kind of working through the lather, that it doesn't feel like there's much resistance. It feels kind of creamy and it's just not too pasty, right? So again, this is kind of a difficult thing to explain. I feel like teaching somebody how to shave with a razor is easier than explaining the lathering part, or at least that's how it was for me. It took me a long time to figure out this lathering thing. So there you go. Okay, we've got the Fatip razor ready to go. It's got one of these. I got it right here, don't I? It's got a Gillette super thin Mejorada in it with a few uses. And let's go in for the first pass. So I've talked about this razor before. Let's start with the good things about these Fatip razors. It's that they're a brass construction. So this is nickel plated brass, kind of like the vintage Gillette razors. And they used to have some plating issues, like they would do kind of a gold plating on some special razors, and the gold would mostly wash away after you used it, you know, a good number of times. But the thing is even with those razors, you've still got that brass construction underneath it. So worst case, you're left with a brass razor, which is to say, in the very long term sense, a brass razor is going to hold up better than a zinc alloy razor would. So even though this is a relatively affordable razor, you still get a nice metal in brass, so that's a good thing about this razor. Even though it's open comb, at least certainly the modern version of the head, it's not a particularly aggressive open comb razor. So similar to the Merkur open comb razors, it's a nice way to try out an open comb for not a lot of money, and it's not too aggressive feeling, right? There's definitely a misconception that all open comb razors are aggressive, and that's just not the case. So if you've never tried an open comb in your time, you've only used a safety bar, get a Fatip or something cheap in the modern sense, or you can go vintage, although some of those vintage open comb razors are definitely quite aggressive. Okay, first pass is done. I'll rinse and come back for pass number 2 in just a moment. Here's pass number 2 with Reserve Cool. Okay, here's the second pass across the grain mostly. And here's my usual question of how's the weather where you are? We seem to have finally settled into our version of summer here, or at least what I like to think of as summer here, which is generally not too warm, not too hot, I should say, just kind of a mild temperature, but often humid kind of days. And we've had some summer storms this week, which has been mostly okay, except for the poor people who had, stuff knocked off their houses or didn't have power for some time. Yeah, we had quite a storm. I guess that was Monday. And speaking of Monday, I want to thank everybody who checked in on me after that tragic incident in Highland Park, which, for those of you who don't know, that's like a north suburb of Chicago, maybe 40 minutes from my front door. And while I don't work specifically there, I work all around there. So I still haven't seen all of my usual clients and students because of the holiday on Monday. But I'm going to be interested to see what some of them say when I see them again, because I think they have to have known somebody who was there. It's not that big of a town, and they live one town over kind of thing. So tragic day on a holiday, no less. And here's hoping that next July 4th is a better one. All right, second pass complete. I'm going to rinse and come back for our final third pass in just a moment. Third and final pass with Reserve Cool. Okay, so I went back and grabbed a little more soap for that third pass, and then realized I needed to add more water too. So that's sort of a two-part suggestion, which is don't be afraid to go back and grab a little more soap between passes if you need it, and then also don't be afraid to add more water if you needed to. Okay, so here we go with the Fatip. Go against the grain mostly. And after rinsing on that second pass, it definitely feels like most of the hair was taken off in just those two passes. And I'll just try to go lightly here on the third as to not drop any more irritation So there's not that much hair left to begin with. Almost 2 weeks ago now, I had a great conversation with John of Lather Hog and the Lather Talk podcast and Discord group also. And unfortunately, Gerard couldn't join us for that. If you know their podcast, usually it's John and Gerard. But anyway, had a really nice conversation with John. We talked about much more than shaving, that's for sure. Had a lot of nice questions from people about music and things like that. And hopefully that'll be released here kind of soon. When it is released, of course, I'll plug it here in a video. But please stay tuned for that. I'm not quite sure when it's going to be released, but I'm being very patient because a lot of people don't realize just how long it takes to edit something like that. And we talked for quite a long time. I usually edit this podcast that I do with a couple Reddit friends, and if the podcast ends up being, I don't know, 45 minutes total, it could take me 3-4 hours to do all that editing. So I'm definitely being patient regarding the Lather Talk podcast. But stay tuned. So we're just doing our touch-ups here. Feels like we got a really close shave. Again, as I mentioned here, I find I usually get better shaves if I'm shaving off 2 days growth as opposed to 1. Just something a little bit easier about picking up those hairs. But yeah, it feels pretty good. So I'm going to do my final rinse and come back and talk to you over post-shave in just a moment. Enjoyed that cool water rinse, and now let's use the matching Reserve Cool Aftershave. This has also since been reformulated, discontinued, however you want to say it. So if you want to pause and look at those ingredients, feel free. I've always thought that these square bottles looked very cool, with the like barber chair patent thing on them. I always thought that was really nice. And also this, these scents were dyed, it's like this one was dyed blue. The spice one was red. And then he discontinued that when he switched to the more typical, circular, round aftershave bottles. It's got a little bit of menthol in it, and it's really close to the soap scent. There was some serious perfume science that went into creating these reserve scents, and so they did a really nice job presenting each of the scents in each format. I'm not saying you'll necessarily like the scents, but the way that they're presented is really well done. So kudos. Let's do a final recap. We used the Reserve Cool from Barrister and Mann soap in the Reserve Base, which is now discontinued. I'm going to leave a link, if I can remember, to the Maggard Razors site because Barrister and Mann is currently closed while they prepare a large kind of bulk order. But you can get this scent still now in the updated Omnibus base, as I mentioned. Here's the matching square splash. You can kind of see the blue aftershave in there. We use the Dogwood Handcrafts Maggard Timberwolf brush. And then finally the Fatip open comb with the Piccolo handle. So thank you all so much, especially if you made it this far in the video. Feel free to leave any comments or questions down below. And for now, this has been HD Shaves. Take care, and we'll see you again next time. Goodbye.